In the heart of the state-of-the-art, at the dawn of the next stage in entertainment, you found No Proscenium.
You have indeed found No Proscenium, the voice of everything immersive. I'm your host, Noah Nelson. This week on the show, we continue our Tribeca Immersive coverage. First, Glenn Neath, one of the artistic directors of DARKFIELD, and Garth Mullins, host of the Crackdown Podcast, join us to talk about Intravene, a new docudrama about the overdose crisis in Vancouver, delivered through DARKFIELD's signature spatial audio. This debuted its first episode at Tribeca Immersive last week, and it is now available along with a second episode on the DARKFIELD radio app. Then, Edward Madojemu, the artist behind Mescaform Hill, The Missing Five, comes through for a lively discussion where we talk the art of storytelling in both XR and comics, two of my favorite topics. We've been watching Edward's work since meeting him back in 2019, and now you can catch his latest in the Oculus TV app, as Mescaform Hill was released during Tribeca. Plus, we get a quick visit from our friend David Spira of Room Escape Artist, updating us on the upcoming RECON. But before we get started, a quick update on what you can find on the site this week. In short, a lot. Not only do we have our Tribeca coverage, including our ongoing review diary, and our creator spotlight feature with 5 interviews, including the directors of the much buzzed about Evolver, the Tribeca X award-winning Emerging Radiance, and the Storyscapes award-winning Kubo Walks the City, but there's even more. Like Danielle Look's feature on the origin of Denver's Odd Knock Productions, which stretches from when the team met as performers on Third Rail Project's The Grand Paradise, all the way through the process that birthed From On High, which is debuting this weekend. Plus, the review rundown has 6 reviews this week, including 2 from the Hollywood Fringe and the latest from Candlehouse Collective. And don't forget to head over to Everything Immersive and check out this week's Trailheads column to discover your next immersive adventure. All of this is brought to you by the generous support of our Patreon backers, of which we had not a single new one this week. So let's change that. Without your help, we can't keep going. So if you find what we do valuable, please make a pledge to our patreon.com/noproscenium today and join our sustaining backers. They are Ari Hurstan, Chris Wollman, Eric Shamlin, Deborah Robinson, Elaine, Jay Bushman, Jerome Joseph Genties, David Bassick, Richard Ayers, Lonnie Hanson, Mark Baltazar, Sydney Guillory, and Jan Budman. Thank you all, and thank you for keeping us going. And now, without any further ado, let's get into our first interview with the creative team behind Intravene. Longtime listeners to No Proscenium are no strangers to DARKFIELD, the production company that uses spatial audio to create chillingly immersive storyscapes, both online and in installation form, setting the bar for what's possible in the field. As part of this year's Tribeca Immersive, DARKFIELD is involved in something a bit different from their fictional fare, partnering with documentarians and activists to create a kind of immersive audio docudrama, Intravene, which plunges listeners into Vancouver's overdose crisis. It's an intense experience that, for something which you can only hear and not see, is at times also intensely visual. Joining us today are Glenn Neath, DARKFIELD's artistic director, and Garth Mullins, Crackdown Podcast host and executive producer of the experience. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Hi, I'm Glenn Neath, one of the artistic directors of DARKFIELD.
I'm Garth Mullins. I'm the host and executive producer of Crackdown, and I'm part of a drug user union here in Vancouver called Vandu.
Before we get into how this all came together, why don't you take a crack at what exactly Intravene is?
I'll give it a shot. We've been telling stories about the overdose crisis from inside of it here in Vancouver for about 3 years. And we were approached by Brenda Longfellow with this opportunity to kind of do a more immersive plunge into the experience. And that's where we met DARKFIELD. And so together we decided to make a couple of immersive documentaries about different aspects of the overdose crisis here.
It all came together with Brenda Longfellow and Andrea Salazar, who's our executive director, met on a UK-Canada immersive exchange program, which sort of put together artists and producers and such like from Canada, from the UK. And from that, Brenda was interested in tackling this subject, and she then got in touch with Garth and Crackdown.
I'm really curious as to what we're hearing in the piece, because there are parts of it that feel like traditional documentary interviews. There are other parts that are completely surrealistic. And of course, you also have a point of view. You're in someone's head the entire time. You're often being kind of dragged into this nether world when someone goes into overdose. How did that approach come together?
I'll just talk a little bit about how the process happened and went on. So we started off with this idea that we, as always, we wanted to, as you say, put the audience member at the center of it. And we've done the whole project basically from online, so we've not been able to be in the same room together. So what happened was we sort of pieced together stuff that Crackdown sent to us. So there's a lot of field recordings that were taken inside an overdose prevention society, which alongside a series of interviews that Garth set up. Now, when we started listening back to this, I mean, all the stuff in the OPS is really, really brilliant and exciting, and the interviews are also brilliant. But they didn't really. It was very difficult to make it feel immersive from our point of view. So what we ended up doing was there was one of the characters that Garth spoke to, Trey Helton, who works at the Overdose Prevention Society, who in the end became the sort of main character within the drama, who basically was speaking to the audience member pretty much the whole time. So we sort of used sections of that interview that Garth did with him and sort of pointed it towards the audience member. And then we then also, in addition to that, did a few extra recordings with an actor who sort of played a minor character in the drama, and a few lines with Trey, which we directed more closely towards the audience member. And that's kind of how it all came together in terms of the structure of it.
No, you said it sounds surreal, parts of it, and the parts of it that sound surreal are real. That's the amazing thing about this. An overdose prevention site is a place where people are smoking rock and shooting what used to be called heroin or fentanyl or whatever, and frequently overdosing and being brought back to life. And so you're in the middle of this place, and it's pretty chaotic. There's people using, there's dogs, there's like someone operating a bag valve to give oxygen. All of this sort of stuff is going on. And then we have Trey in a separate interview explaining what's happening, explaining that he knows this world really well because he used to live in it. He used to be a drug user himself. And so he takes us right into it. And that's the surreal part, is that there's this place where people who are, not paid that much are there saving people's lives every day, to try and get through. To me, that's the surreal part. And then the addition of lines from an actor just helps remind you of who you are in all of this, that you're actually standing in this place, so they might say something closer to your ear. So you're like, oh yeah, I am actually here. And then of course we recorded the OPS site itself in binaural audio. So it's a real surround 3-dimensional experience, a lot of moving parts.
So when you're in the OPS, that's live location sound you guys recorded.
Oh yeah, we did not make that up. That is 100% real. In fact, I mean, you can't make it up,
No, I mean, you can't write that. And it was also really important for us that we weren't really interested in writing anything. It felt like we wanted all the text and the words to be to belong to the people who were in the spaces. It felt perverse to start trying to put things into people's mouths, which is why the actor became kind of, we had more pretensions to have more recorded studio sections that we would traditionally do, but it felt like they didn't seem to fit right. So it's very, very minimal in terms of what's added. Most everything is, as Garth said, is live in this space and out of the mouths of the people.
It strikes me that this is a different way of working for both of you, but coming from different directions. So maybe actually let me start with Garth. You've been telling stories on the Crackdown podcast about this crisis, they said, for like 3 years now, working in this immersive form, working in a form that puts the audience as a character, as a point of view. Has that something that you had experimented before in the audio format, or was this working immersive style completely new to you?
I mean, we've done traditional audio documentary storytelling, except for my own life gives me a personal stake in all this. I've been a heroin user for a lot of years, and then methadone more recently, and a lot of the people on Crackdown are friends and sort of comrades from struggles for ending the overdose crisis. So it's like I already kind of live there, and we've tried to take listeners there, but we've used sort of the devices of storytelling, character, narrative tension, like sound for sure, lots of live sound, but we haven't ever used immersive yet. So we always thought we want to bring the listener into this world, but we never thought of, and they should stand right here. You know what I mean? We never had that detail of sort of worked out,
Were folks at the OPS when you were using the binaural setup?
Oh yeah.
Were they weirded out by what you were doing? Like how, like one of the things when you're working in the setting and you're doing documentary work is, building the rapport with the subjects, and you've been in this space for a while, so I imagine a lot of that had already been done. But new equipment always shakes things up.
Well, the binaural rig we have, you can get the fancy kind that have like a head.
Right.
And so if we were walking around into the OPS carrying a head, the tape you would have heard was like, "Hey, Garth, who did you kill? Whose head is that?"
Right.
But what we used is the in-ear binaural rig. So it's like putting a microphone in your ear. So I think for our producer, Alex DeBoer, who was wearing them, a lot of people just probably thought this is someone with earbuds in because they're very small. And I've known Trey Helton, who's the character and who also works at the OPS. I've known him for several years. So, like when a few of the people in the place, everyone's like, okay, this person's all right. It's no problem.
Yeah. So you guys are well suited to get this one put together. Glenn,
I think so. In fact, that's what Crackdown can bring, because places like the OPS have experienced a lot of sort of very sensationalistic and exploitative kind of journalistic coverage. And so the access that we got and the latitude to do a bunch of interviews, we're not the only people who can do that, but it's not everybody. It's like there is a trust, there is a relationship there.
Glenn, this is also a very different way for y'all to work. Have you done nonfiction work in this format before?
No, but I think what we tend to do with all of our work is we start with the story is often the thing that comes last. So often we start with an audience configuration or a sort of a set design, and we then try and find a story that fits into that. So I always think of it as we start with a set of parameters or a set of obstacles, which we then fit something into. And so when we started this, it didn't feel unusual actually to be working with material that Crackdown provided. All the sort of the field recordings and their interviews felt like just another parameter that we then tried to find a way to use. But so I suppose it was just about shaping it really, and trying to find and trying to collage together what we had and decide what were. There was lots of interviews, really great interviews that Garth did with other people that never made it into the piece, but they did make it onto the to the Crackdown podcast version of this episode, but they just didn't fit, because it felt a little bit like you were sitting in this space, and then there was these two people talking to each other, and it didn't feel as if you were activated, if you like, in it. So this is why we sort of took out Garth and just stuck with Trey, so it felt as if Trey was speaking to you rather than to somebody else.
The piece winds up being, I mentioned this in the open, intensely visual. I think it's one of the most visual pieces I've gotten out of DARKFIELD yet. And does it hit that way for y'all as well? Because it really feels like not only the OPS, not only, you know, kind of being able to sense and see what's going on in there, but then there is this other kind of you know, meta layer, like a fictional layer of sort of a limbo space where you're waiting on your number to be called, and this is sort of an act break thing that happens. It's also what happens when someone when the point of view you're in is ODing, but even that has this, you know, this visual nature to it.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I think the overdose prevention site recordings are really visual, I suppose. But you know, because it's people with so many different people, it's they're extraordinary, and as Garth said, they're not something that you could ever create, because it's all, you know, it's also real. I suppose the other space that we created, we were trying to find, I think, some way of bringing in some other stuff. So there's a few lines from the interviews in that space as well, but also to create a sort of sense of how does it feel to have an overdose, and we sort of wanted to bring the audience member into that sort of that situation, or get us close to it. I mean, obviously the audience understands that they're not overdosing, but I suppose it's about trying to get them as close to that as possible.
Garth, how do those sequences work from your point of view?
Yeah, I'm blind, so nothing's really visual to me. So I never really thought about it that way. You know, I don't know if there's a auditory version of imagination. You know, imagination has image in it, but there must be some version of like how you trigger all these deeper parts of your brain through audio input. But it really does do that to me. The unfortunate thing is I've been there so much that I already know what it looks like. So it's hard for me to hear that tape fresh, right, you know, and hard for me to encounter those people for the first time when I've known them for a long time. But I mean, I'm glad to hear you say that.
Well, also, I mean, I'm also thinking about the sequences where the, you know, the overdose happens. Like there's this, it sounds like someone's going underwater, and kind of coming out in a different space. Like, does that feel, does it have like the sheen of truth to you?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that. Like, I've overdosed myself, so I was describing to the DARKFIELD team on our Zoom meetings what I kind of thought it could be like. You know, it's like it is like a certain kind of underwater feeling, or the world kind of disappears from you, or when you reemerge into it, you know, it does feel like you're breaking the surface of something, and water seemed like a good metaphor. So it does ring true to me. Different people probably have different experiences of overdose, and of course, depending on what drugs you overdose on, can change that as well. But it does come from a true place.
The years you've been telling these stories, have you seen a shift in perception in Vancouver about the overdose crisis? Or do you feel like you're making progress in terms of the way the public understands things there?
Yeah, I think we have been able to punch through to the public and to journalists a little bit. You know, Canada's a small place. Vancouver's kind of a small place. We know a lot of the people who work as opinion makers, and we have been able to, I think, create a space for a more humane view of people who use drugs. We haven't really punched through to the policy level quite yet. people are still dying in record numbers, and governments in Canada are, fussing around at the edges with little incremental pilot projects and stuff, but nothing to really get at the thousands and thousands of people who are dying. So, I think we put our foot in the door of a conversation, but really, there's a long way to go.
Glenn, now that you guys had this experience of working in nonfiction, is this a new door open up for DARKFIELD and the platform?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, well, we're sort of always interested in any kind of project if it sort of excites us. And when Brenda started talking about this, it felt like we could do something really interesting with it. We also, we've also just made Paradise, which is on in South by Southwest, which is about intimate partner violence, and that's another sort of documentary collaboration. So they were coming thick and fast, but yeah. It's not that, the way we work is we're just making our work, and if we come across something that interests us, we'll jump on board. Yeah, so we're always up for new stuff.
Well, and given the way story emerges out of your process, it's I'm reminded that that's very much a journalistic process, even in your fiction work. Building the scene, looking at the elements, and trying to puzzle out how it all fits together, and then finding a through line. I mean, that's the process of making a news package or a produced piece in audio.
Yeah.
You're always working that way. So it in some ways it doesn't surprise me that you guys have landed here. In fact, I feel kind of like an idiot for not seeing that this was something that was definitely possible. How has the reaction to the piece been so far at Tribeca? I gotta admit, like it was really intense and freaked me out a little bit. So I'm wondering if you're seeing people kind of shocked by it, or
a little bit. Yeah. I mean, intense is the word that most everybody's used, and we have had a couple of people. There was one guy who left yesterday, couldn't sit through it, and a woman whose son was an addict, and she had to leave as well. So there has been some quite strong reactions to it, and it's been very, very positive. I mean, it's only been on for 2 or 3 days so far, and it's a bit of an outlier here. I mean, everything else pretty much is VR, so we're very much standalone in terms of what we're offering. But yeah, it's been going very well, and you can, it's available to book from Wednesday, and the shows that start on the app on the 16th on Thursday. So you'll be able to access, the public will be able to access it online on the app from then.
All right, Garth, if people want to learn, if people come through Intravene, they hear this and they want to learn more about what's going on in Vancouver with the crisis, where can they go?
Anywhere where you get podcasts, you can listen to Crackdown or crackdownpod.com. So when we recorded all the tape with DARKFIELD to make this immersive episode, we made a longer episode on drug contamination, including benzodiazepines that's happening. So it includes some audio from the OPS and a discussion with Trey, but also discussion between relationship between two people, Martin and Laura, who are trying to survive the overdose crisis, trying to survive the continuing contamination of the drug supply, and how their relationship works out. So it's like there's a little sort of kernel from the immersive part nestled in this love story almost. So if people want to, if they got a taste for it here, come to crackdownpod.com and get the whole thing.
All right. Well,
and
Glenn,
just to say also, there's also a second episode which will be going out at the same time as Benzo's, the first episode on the 16th, which will kind of get part of as part of the same package.
All right. Well, definitely going to dive into that over here as well, because I'm very, very blown away by what you guys made this time out. Glenn and Garth, thank you both so much. Intravene, as we know, is coming to the DARKFIELD radio app. It'll be up by the time this episode airs, and the rest of you hopefully have caught parts of it at Tribeca already. Again, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Stay safe. Keep 6, everybody. See you
Thanks
later.
very much. Thanks for having us on. Cheers.
Hello, this is David Spira from RoomEscapeArtist.com, and I'd like to take a moment to tell you about the Reality Escape Convention, RECON. We're hosting it in Boston, Massachusetts this August 21st and 22nd. RECON is an immersive gaming convention that celebrates gaming and creates opportunities for people to learn while playing and also learn wonderful things from our fantastic speakers, in addition to many social opportunities. RECON is almost sold out. We have fewer than 5 tickets left, so if you want to get them, please do try. I cannot promise they are available at this point. Additionally, if you have a product or service for players or creators of immersive games, we have sponsorship opportunities, and we would love to be able to tell you more about those and see if they fit your brand. Whether you're a player or creator, we want you at RECON, and if you can't make it, please do check out all of our content. Like our friends at No Proscenium, we are constantly putting out information for our community, and you can find all that at RoomEscapeArtist.com. But if you are looking to get to RECON or sponsor RECON, you can learn more about that at realityescapecon.com. Hope to see you in Boston.
As we're wrapping up production this morning, there are just 2 tickets left to RECON. So if a weekend of immersive gaming sounds good to you, you might want to skedaddle over to realityescapecon.com, just like David told you. So before the dark times, before the pandemic, one of the last cool things I got to do was go up to the Vancouver International Film Festival, which has a pretty robust XR component. At the time, one of the things that was happening was Kaleidoscope had put on this like incubator program, as part of the festival as a whole. And there was this guy right here, Edward Madojemu, who had this amazing piece which mixed comic books and VR animation in a way that I hadn't seen anyone else do, and really kind of haven't seen anyone else completely do since. And I was over the moon with this piece, from the storytelling, from the craft, and from the way it let us kind of peek around outside the frame. And when Tribeca Immersive rolled around this year and started announcing who was in it, Edward was in Tribeca. Edward, I'm so glad to have you on the show and talking about you being in Tribeca, man.
I'm so happy to be here. Yeah, this has honestly been like a dream come true. Just like a few years ago, this was something that was like on the far horizon, that one day I want to, get a project like this out and debut it at a big festival. And it's the fact that it's, 2019 was like, oh god, 2019 was a long time ago. But yeah, it feels amazing. I'm still not fully, I still haven't fully processed it, if I'm being honest.
Well, it's how long have you been working in this field now? Because 2019 both is very close and very far away, but your path to doing this hybrid kind of work must have started before then.
Yeah, actually, I'd say I've been working in XR in general since maybe late 2017. That's when I first tried out anything VR. And the first thing I ever saw in VR was Dear Angelica, Oculus Story Studio, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind, which is also really great because now Mescaform Hill just released with the same people who made Dear Angelica, so it just blows my mind. After that, my older brother, he bought an Oculus and he was like, you need to try this thing out. And then He shows me Dear Angelica, and the same day he's like, "Do you want to use the thing that you used to make Dear Angelica?" I'm like, "Yes." And then, you start drawing in 3D space, and eventually, like, you realize there's so much you can do. There's so for like the next, and I was starting my degree at the same time. I was studying animation at Emily Carr University, and it wasn't like I came there to study 2D animation, but then I tried XR like before, like in my first week of school, and it,
Oh my goodness.
like I couldn't like go back to just doing 2D animation for that point in time. It kind of broke the curriculum for me, because like all I could think about was this was virtual reality. It was, so yeah, been about 5 years now, just doing this kind of work on and off, and it's it's been a big journey.
You mentioned the name of the piece that's in Tribeca. That's Mescaform Hill, The Missing Five. Before
Yes.
we get too deep into the how, let's start with the story here. What's the tale you're telling? And I know your brother Adam is part of that telling as well.
Yes. So my brother Adam and I created Mescaform Hill initially as a webcomic, and the general idea was just to kind of explore the lives of everyday people in an African part of the world, because it's I don't know, it's what we grew up on, and it's where we grew up, and we kind of realized, especially since moving here, it's like there's a very different, like a mundane life here is very different from back there, and we just kind of realized there's so much unexplored stories that and no one telling them. I was like, who better than us, right? Because we've lived there and we're here working in this field too. So Mescaform Hill, The Missing Five specifically, is kind of like, I would say it's our attempt to tell a grander story with it. Because when we started the project, it was this webcomic, and it was kind of this kind of slice of life type of thing, and then from time to time we do like a short film here and there to kind of test out a small animated piece and just to experiment with the property for a bit. But then we never really committed to telling like a full story. And then when Missing Five came into being, where it's like, oh, we can actually tell something that kind of takes all this core concept of like this small African town, and just the kind of things that happen there, and the different forces at play, and the different journeys all the characters have. So Mescaform Hill, The Missing Five is basically the story that explores. It's kind of I'm trying to like find a way to talk about it without giving too much away. But basically, as the title suggests, there's basically several policemen have gone missing, right? And this young cadet kind of wants to prove himself by solving this big case that's stirring up so much commotion. But then he quickly learns that there's a lot more at play to this story. It's not as straightforward as he can, and it's kind of like he needs to. It's kind of like him seeing how much more complex the world he's in is, and then reevaluating where he wants to be in that.
I don't want to give too many spoilers, because one, it is available for folks who are checking out Tribeca right now, whether they're there physically or they're approaching via the Museum of Other Realities. But also, it's either coming to, or is it out on Oculus TV right now as well?
It is out on Oculus TV right now. Yeah, you can watch it right now.
Yeah, so that means anyone with a set, Oculus set can, and I highly recommend that you do. So, maybe even if you want to go pure spoiler free, and like I said, I won't go too far. Let's just like pause here, go watch, and then come back, and we'll dive a little more, and maybe even like we'll come back and do like a spoiler cast at some point.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So there's an element here, a little mythic, magical, kind of seeps in at the edge, but I'm interested because it's also, there's sort of sociological storytelling. There's some structural stuff about the world you're showing that moves the plot pieces, moves the characters into position to sort of be opened up into this bigger world. So I'm wondering, as you and your brother, develop this, like how you see that relationship between telling a story about the real factors in the world, and how that is contrasted with the mythic, which is always about from my understanding, about the emotional and like sort of the emotional logic
Mm.
of the world,
Right.
versus say the political logic of the world.
Yeah. Totally. That's something that we've definitely thought about. Like my brother Adam, he tends to like. I mean, we both share this, but we're not able to tell purely escapist stories. I don't think either of us are good at that, because in our experience, you kind of we're used to kind of taking things as they are, and finding the escapism within those things, right? So especially in the story, bringing in those, like thinking about how it relates to the real world events and things that happen regularly back home in Nigeria, for example. It's not so much of like we put this here to say, oh, this is this or this is that. It's kind of like it's wrapped up into the DNA. So for us, it's more about seeing the way these things are and how they interact with each other. Because for the characters, the various characters in the experience, you can see how all these, like the people they're up against, the situation affects them. And something that's interesting to us is like those things aren't affecting them because of the themes of the story necessarily. They're affecting them because it's a part of their everyday life. It's something they have to deal with, right? So it stops being even something where we have to think about, oh, what's the political thing we're saying here, because it's just a part of our of the day-to-day life back home, right? So when you bring in the supernatural elements, it's kind of like a way to heighten certain things, because there's that idea of contrasting things that you can, like, fiction is really good at contrasting things and making things clear that you can't really see in real life. So I like the idea that the supernatural element tends to heighten things for us to kind of see things clearly. I can use this otherworldly element of the story to kind of accentuate the very real aspects of it. So that's how that interplays. There's a lot more to it that we're hoping to explore sometime in the future. So I won't go too much into it because I don't want to give too much away. But it's definitely something that we always try to make sure that element isn't there for spectacle necessarily. There might be some spectacle to it, but it's always, like you said, there's always something emotional at the bottom, and it's always present in a way that it makes meaning, and also doesn't. And here's the most important thing for me is it doesn't. If anything, it kind of makes it, like whenever you have a supernatural element, you're kind of, it's not displacing what the reality is in any way. It's, if anything, it's making it clear. It's like a caricature of what it is. It's showing more of what something is. My grad film, actually titled Light Catchers, was about these kind of like monkey-like mythical creatures that come during the day and steal electricity by like biting into the wires. And the whole inspiration for that was because back home in Nigeria, we didn't have stable electricity. The power could go out at any time, and you kind of don't know when it's coming back. So, and that was kind of the idea. But when in that case, I use the supernatural to show it by having, even though just the lack of the infrastructure back home is the cause of this problem, I replaced it with this creature to make it a bit more fantastical and interesting. But at the same time, it doesn't take away from what the reality is. It's, if anything, it kind of shows you how scary it can be, and how like it could be a little annoying thing, and then it can really become something scary. So it's just, that's kind of the approach we try to take with everything.
I mean, that's the core of like myth and religion, right? Is like trying to come up with a something that feels emotionally true for the raw chaos of the world, right? I mean, that's any kind of storytelling. There's some philosophers who would say, like, everything we do is just putting a story on the absolute chaos of the world, that there might even not be real causation. We're just coming up with, this has happened because of this, that, the other thing, and it's like, no, we're just guessing. We're just guessing. We do that at all layers, from the interpersonal to the societal.
Yeah.
But instead of casting forward into where you might go with Mescaform Hill as a story world, I'm wondering, how long has this story been with you? How long, both the story world of Mescaform, but also this particular tale about the young officer trying to prove himself, the child connecting with their parents, like all these elements.
Right. I would say it's been there for a while. Adam was the initial spark of this specific tale. He was the one who kind of put it together, and I fleshed it out during production. But I would say we've talked about something along these lines for years. Like we worked on Mescaform Hill. The Missing Five took about a year to create, so including a few months for development. So a lot of the story was kind of locked into place during that time. But I would say the earlier tale of like this, these things with the police have been there for much longer. It's come from, a mix of personal experience, just also like news back home. It's been something that I feel, it's one of those things that I feel like was inevitable. Like at some point we were gonna tell a story about this regardless, but this Mescaform Hill just ended up being a nice vessel to get this story out, because not only did this, especially this particular tale, give us the opportunity to talk about this issue, but also allowed us to, how do I put it, like show the complexities that come with it. It's not like, I have a hard time even reducing it to just being about this one thing or this, because there's a lot of all the characters, the way we see how they interact with the police, that they interact with one another, the kind of, there's an atmosphere to it that I feel like has been there for a very, very, very long time. Even like I can think back, like I think the earliest, even like I say back in 2017, which is when we actually started committing to the idea of Mescaform Hill as a concept. I'd say that's, since back then, it's still been something prevalent. It's only just coming out now.
You mentioned that you went to university for studying 2D and you wound up getting seduced to the virtual side, but you've worked across comics and VR, and indeed, how was your day? Manifested, which is the piece I got to see back in 2019, manifested across both platforms. Like there was a comic version that was on the iPad, and there was a almost six, I guess, like a 6 DoF version that was accessible, and there's also been a 3 Degree of Freedom version. This piece here is on Oculus TV. It's 3 Degrees of Freedom. I'm wondering, since you've had the story world of Mescaform Hill with you for a while now, as you just said, did you know when you went to start doing the Missing Five, did you know you were making a 3DoF experience, or did you find that this is how you wanted to approach it? I guess what was the creative brief here? And a little, maybe there's even chicken and the egg when it comes to meta. Was this something they approached you about doing, or you approached them? And like, why is it the Destructor taking this form?
Right. I see.
Yeah.
I should actually just point out that it is actually 6DoF. It's just the presentation is mostly, it's kind of closer to there. So there is like, if you were to like get up and like approach things, it is like they're all 3-dimensional. Pretty much everything you're seeing is 3-dimensional, but it's kind of a seated fixed experience. So the depth only kind of comes in cues. But yeah,
I'll note, like I did the Museum of the Realities version of it,
I would explain,
and like, and that one, like, and my recommendation, as much as the museum is really good, my recommendation for everybody is with the Quest Oculus TV version, do that one, because with the Moore version, if you turn and look around, you see the door back into the Moore, and so it throws you out, and also it's not. It's a little shaky, but yeah, like I was definitely doing like, I can lean a little bit. I can see outside the frame, but I already intend to plug myself back in before I actually like review the piece into the Quest version, because I was like, I think this will probably be better in Oculus TV. That being said, which came first?
I would say it was they reached out to us and that's how we ended up putting this together. And it was kind of, we kind of always knew from day one it was going to be on the Oculus TV VR animation platform, right? So no, I'd done pieces that are all up on that platform before, so I kind of knew what the limitations were of, it's like in contrast to like Damien Phalion and How Was Your Day, it's like the 6DoF version of that had a much wider range of like interactivity. You could actually step into the world at any time. There was a lot more functionality because we custom built that whole setup But this one was I would say VR animation player is a lot more. It's more for viewing and exclusive. It's not there is you have the interactivity of like when the story stops and starts, but it's not as free in that sense. So we kind of always knew it was going to be that way. But I actually kind of took that in stride in this case, because it was like with Damien Phelan, it was a lot about, because once again I'll say that Damien Phelan was the blueprint for this project, because it was still figuring out how do comics actually fit in virtual reality as a whole and in 3D space. It was like there was a lot. There's actually in my head there's two major ways it can go, right? And I would say Mescaform Hill now is one of those ways. I'll say that Mescaform Hill is the more theatrical, version of it, where you're kind of seated in one spot, right? And it's not so much about you exploring, it's about you being along for this ride of this. It's about being kind of like up close and personal with the pages of a comic book. It's more, I'll say it's closer to that, whereas the other way to go, which is closer to what we do with Damien Phelan, is more user centric in the way you explore, and it's kind of centered around how you wish to experience the story. Whereas Mescaform Hill is more of we're telling you the story. It's entirely subjective, if that makes any sense. So, I would say the way we approached it was just to lean into that, because I wanted to like see how far can we push the medium with things like the multiple panels and like the contrast of sometimes you're in the world, sometimes you're not. Because some feedback I've been getting is that really amazes me is some people I think early on in the first act of the third, when you finally like get placed into the world and you're in this kind of police station, and a lot of people have told me that moment was really like they really felt like the immensity of that space, because we'd had them outside looking into the panels up until that point, right? So there's all these interesting opportunities to explore with that, and like what does it feel like to actually be like up close and personal with a comic book, not sometimes inside it, but like the idea just see how do we abstract you into that limbo space between the panels of a comic book, right? And that was the formula was kind of like, let's see how far we can push that as a pure storytelling experience, with minus the exploration. There's still a bit of that there, because I'm a sucker for that stuff. So that's why we had those big moments where you're in the world, because we wanted you to kind of like inhabit it just like the characters do, at least for a few moments. But that was kind of how that came to be. But at the same time, I'll say that it's definitely they reached out first, and this was kind of, we knew going in, but it was something we just kind of leaned hard into.
One of the things I love is when you are using panels in the piece, you will sometimes get a sense of, what's just outside of the frame. And if you like tilt your head, you can kind of see a little bit more into the world. Or even at times, if you're at a certain angle, you might see that the frame the panel is masking, a slightly larger image. And some of this is, the artifacting of how it was made, but it's tantalizing in a way, and it feels thematic of this whole notion of there's a world beyond the story we're looking at any given moment, and these characters live in this bigger world. And then you also play around with things where like characters like bust out of the frame, right? That has an emotional intensity to it as well, the same way it does in a comic when an artist breaks the panel. But of course, here you get to have it in the third dimension as well, and it puts these characters into a different spatial relationship to them. I wonder if you can actually talk to that, of like the relation between the layout of a comic book page and approaching 2D storytelling, which you definitely have completely the skill set to knock that out of the park, and the spatial storytelling that goes on in a 3D environment.
Right. Yeah, that was. I can talk for hours about that. That was something we had to.
I'll give you 7 minutes. No. I'd love to hear hours, but the show is only
minutes. Okay, but basically the idea, we had to basically relearn everything. I thought from Damien Phelan I would know everything, but no, I had to relearn this whole thing, because right? Because on comic, on a flat piece of paper, you're abstracting time in this clearly linear fashion. The first left, if you're reading left to right, panel left to right and top to down. So it's like left, right, like time is moving left to right and top down. So it's easy to confirm. But in space, it's not quite the same. There's no objective forward direction in space, right? So, and also because of the way the comic, because of the way the Mescaform plays out, and the panels kind of, they're not, you don't like control them one at a time. They pop up in order. So we had time already like built in for the user. They just have to kind of pay attention. But at the same time, it's like we have to strike this balance of like the panels are clearly in a linear order, but at the same time they operate as spaces. So we kind of had to design our, like we had to design the panel layouts as kind of like spatial, like as simultaneously as environments, but also like as an abstraction of time, which is hard to say. It's very hard to like explain or even visualize sometimes, because you have to figure out, okay, how much, like not only how do these like panels look in isolation in terms of like individual story moments, but how do they weigh? For example, you find like, if you wanted to, like, this is in comic book language, right? You'd have like a bigger, wider panel to kind of show, like, to kind of imply that this is a longer stretch of time that we're looking at,
Right.
And a thinner panel for like really fast movements. Here, it amounts to like things like scale, right? It's like, this is a big moment. So the panel itself has to be really big, but also the panel that came before that has to be nested within that new panel in an interesting way. We had sometimes, because there's sometimes where we'd have like two panels that are clearly behind frames, and then we have a third one that's kind of spatial in front of you, and we have to figure out how do we layer those in a way that felt like, like for example, we played a lot with like depth, and having like we have like the closer, like we try to use depth sometimes to like give you that sense of time progression. So like the further back something is, the further it's in the past. It's as it's getting closer, it's a more recent event. It's kind of like something we found is like, because it's hard to, with space, I feel like space is extremely malleable because we didn't want to make the panel layouts get boring too fast. So we were like, we have to kind of establish those rules and break them from time to time. It was a really tricky balance strike, but something we learned is people pick it up almost like without even knowing. They're picking up the language of
when something works real well. I like to call that Apple obvious, right? It's like when something works and it's just smooth and people get it almost intuitively, it's usually a sign of like just a lot of hard work to find the thing that seems intuitive to the viewer or the user, but for the storyteller, for the developer, it is often the hardest thing, is coming up with a thing that feels simple. And I completely hear what you're saying with like, things farther out feel like they're in the past, they're at a distance, right? There's their physical distance is emotional distance, is the distance of time to the viewer. And then you also have that going on inside the box with the characters themselves, like how far apart characters are going to be. That level of spatial storytelling it's a whole nother dimension in a real way.
Totally. Yeah. So there's a lot of like, I remember this one panel where they're pointing at a character in the corner, and we have to kind of imply their spatial relationship with the way, with like the imagined planes of the panels that they're framing, right? There are all these new rules that I can't wait to like see other people take on and like, break and reestablish, because it's a whole other, it's like you can't just have it's not a flat canvas anymore. The canvas is a room. It's a 4 walls, is it 5 walls? We don't know. It's really exciting, honestly. Yeah.
You talked about there being these two ways of approaching comics in VR. Are you actively pursuing both pathways at the moment, or are you kind of switching back and forth between the two, or is the current path you're on the one you want to kind of refine for a while?
I think I might be pivoting back to the other one. I mean, once again, I don't think there's only two ways, but in my experience, these are the two ways I find the most interesting. And the one we've done with Mescaform Hill now, I don't have terms for them, so I'm just gonna say this is the more story intense version, and I'll say the other one, which is what I want to pivot to, actually is the exploration driven one, because I found like I still find like one of the most successful parts of Damien Feeling for me was just the people who would jump who would jump into the experience, because the second they realize they can do that, it changes the entire way they approach the whole thing. They become like detectives. They become like narrative detectives almost. And I found with mixing that with comics is a really interesting way to like play around. The downside of that kind of that approach to it is it's more, you kind of have to, I feel like it's hard to tell a linear story in the traditional way. It's like I don't think we'd be able to tell Mescaform Hill, the Missing Five, the way we did with that kind of format. It kind of works. It lends itself better to stuff that has layers of like depth. And I would say there needs to be a feeling of, how do I put it? There needs to be a feeling of exploration driving the whole thing. You need to kind of feel, it needs to be like about constant questions that get answered, and then those answers reframe things you've already seen. There's this kind of sense of like, I would say in that case, space becomes becomes your canvas. It's not so much about it's not so much about me giving you this clearly linear timeline of events. It's about you exploring the space, and as you explore it, you're seeing these stories in these different orders, and the way you see them, the order in which you see them, it's kind of like navigating a museum space, right? We all see the same exhibits, but the order in which we saw them and where we chose to go and how much time we spent with them completely changes how we contextualize that experience, and that's something I'm really excited to dive into more. I don't know what form that's going to be in. It might not be Mescaform Hill. It might be something else. I'm not entirely sure yet, but that's kind of where I want to pivot to, because having done Mescaform Hill, the Missing Five, it's clear that there's a valid, viable path towards comic book storytelling in VR for me anyway. Like I can see something that echoes, or if not, or is even truer to what comics already are, thriving in VR. But I really want to see something that really allows the audience to participate in the storytelling, which is something I think comics are exceptional at, because you read the dialogue, the sound effects, all that stuff. You imagine that with the author. It's very collaborative in that sense, and I want to find a way to. I think I'm really excited in exploring ways to do that with not just like the sound effects or the dialogue, but in terms of like how the actual story is structured. It's like how letting the audience be collaborating with the audience to tell the story. Like it would be great if there's some way to, and I have some ideas, but I don't want to put the horse before the cart before the horse or something yet. So it's very exciting. I'm definitely going on that rabbit hole next.
Well, I'm super excited. I mean, I'm so glad that Mescaform Hill is out there, and that there's now something that people can find, that it's basically built into the Oculus, that the festival circuit community is going to find it at Tribeca, and they're going to be introduced to you and start to know your voice. And I'm hoping that opens up more doors and gets you more resources, because getting to play the way you were just talking about, I cannot wait. I've been since that day in 2019. Like that's all I've wanted. Almost like in a top 5 of things I want to see. Just period is that, because you've managed to bring in all of these things that I love: comics, XR. Genre storytelling that's rooted in, solid characters, but that's also rooted in this sense of, the way the world really works. So even though you might be doing sci-fi, even though you might be doing a supernatural tale, these characters live in a world that is recognizably related to ours. And nothing excites me more in general, in the world, than those kinds of stories, and to see all of those elements being put together. I'm just rambling like a fanboy now, but I'm glad that was the answer. So
you just made my day, because that's honestly all I obsess about when it comes to stories these days. It's like, if I can't make it, somebody else needs to make it, please.
Dude, I want to see you make it. I really do. I really do. Like, I mean, people who are listening who haven't seen your work yet, you know, they're like, oh, like, why is Noah like being this way? It was one of those, like, the scales falling off my eyes moments when I walked through the frame in How Was Your Day? And, you know, I think everything you're doing with Mescaform Hill, because the restrictions of that format means that you're focusing more on the moment to moment storytelling, the spatial relationships inside the space, all of that stuff. That's all additive as well. And with the piece you did with the fact that How Was Your Day had one version of it that was the comic, and one version of it, like there's the 3-dot version that's in the more that you can go check out. I think it's still around.
Yeah.
At least in one of the iterations. And then have like the full exploratory version. It also shows that, you know, the workflow pipeline can create these multiple approaches to the story and the experience. And that itself is like a microcosm of the way big IPs do transmedia, but it's also a way of meeting audiences where they are.
Yeah.
And it's just so good. It's so good.
That's all. That's what it's all about to me. Just that accessibility. I need. Yes. I mean, I have my parents are like, we want to watch this thing. Where can we watch it? And I'm like, oh God, that's a can of worms. So it's like, here's a comic. Yeah. Right. So
you can handle that, right? Yeah. No, I love it. But it's true. It's absolutely true. Yeah. Well, Edward, as we've noted, Mescaform Hill, The Missing Five, it's at Tribeca right now. It's also anywhere an Oculus Quest is. Just plug into Oculus TV and you will find it there. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I will be following your career like with interest forever. So
thank you so much for having me. It was really spectacular talking to you, and also finally I've been like, because I remember last time we chatted and you were like, oh, I can't wait to the next iteration. And I was like, I'm hush, like I was working on it at the time, and I'm just like, I want to say so much, but I'm glad this is finally out. And this was great. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, man. Any old time. Once again, I want to thank Glenn, Garth, and Edward for being our guests on the show this week. Also want to thank David for swinging by and giving us an update on RECON. I've got a skedaddle, so that's it for the show this week. Next week, we've got an interview with the creators of Illustration in the can already, so that's definitely going to be part of the show. And on the site, you're going to find even more Tribeca coverage wrapping up. We've got some more diaries coming up. I believe the review crew next week, we're going to do an episode about what we've checked out there. And there's going to be a rundown, all the usual suspects, and I think we'll be able to get a call sheet out as well. As always, we do all this with your support. We did the Patreon plug at the beginning, patreon.com/noproscenium. Help spread the word. If you like the show, please jump into Apple Podcasts and drop us a little review and let everybody know that we're good little boys and girls here. So send that our way. It helps a lot, helps people to discover the show, and our show is a discovery tool for creators. So hopefully a nice virtuous circle going on there. You wouldn't think that stuff matters, and yet it does. Isn't it silly? All right. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Let's do the credits. The associate producer of this podcast is Parker Sella. Music for No Proscenium is by Chris Porter of the Speakeasy Society. Special thanks to Siobhan O'Loughlin for voicing our intro. Siobhan's got her 100th episode of Please Don't Touch the Artist, hitting this weekend. I believe it's coming up on Saturday. And I produce and host this thing. I'm Noah Nelson. And until next time, I'll see you at the show.